Welcome to Directionally Correct, a PLX podcast with Cole and Scott. Today's guest, the Renaissance man himself, Max Blumberg.
Hey, Directionally Correct fans, we're off this week, so here's a replay of a previous episode we thought you'd like. If you're looking to stay connected to the podcast, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter on Substack to get behind-the-scenes information, watch our videos on YouTube, or check out other episodes of the podcast on your app of choice. Thanks for listening. Directionally Correct is dedicated to you, our listeners, to help educate and entertain you on how to effectively do people analytics. By supporting this podcast, you are helping us continue to provide valuable insights and knowledge to our listeners. Please consider becoming a patron of the podcast. You can find the link to sign up in the show notes or at patron.podbean.com/directionallycorrect. Thanks for your support. All opinions are our own and do not reflect those of any other organization.
Max, there he is.
The big guy himself.
Dudes, I'm so honored to be your second podcast. Well, I was until I saw the title of it now. Emergency podcast. I mean, that does detract slightly from the great honor, emergency. Yeah, we got you in, Max, because the other dude couldn't make it. It's great to have you here.
It is great to have you here. And I think that, if you come on 3 more times, we'll have to give you, a jacket or a medal or something.
Exactly. That picture of mine is not doing good things, is it?
No, it's really not.
I look like something out of Star Wars or worse.
You're like Homer Simpson backing into the bushes.
Well, exactly. Yeah. Shiny thing. Okay.
Well, Max, I'm glad you feel honored to be the first guest we've had on the podcast twice. And It is an honor. And we are actually really excited. I actually re-listened to your first episode. And the last thing that we said on that episode is we'd love to have you back on the podcast. So we'll see if that holds true at the end of this episode to bring you back for a third time.
We do honor our word.
You are good people. Now, just give me time. How do I change the background when I'm in the meeting? That ain't so easy because you've got to get to Zoom.
Well, while you're figuring that out, Max, let me introduce you real quick. So Max joined us for episode 12 of the podcast, where we branded him as the Renaissance man of people analytics, because I feel like he's done everything under the sun. So go back and listen to that episode if you haven't had the chance. It's a lot of fun. But in terms of Max's background, he is Max Blumberg. He's the sole proprietor of Blumberg Partnership. He's an affiliated research scientist with University of Southern California and the Center for Effective Organizations. Got a PhD in psychology, and probably for the sake of the conversation we're going to have today, he's actually IPO'd a tech company and led a company in the past, not just been, a people analytics researcher. And he's had a very crazy career all over the place with many accolades and prestigious positions. So thanks for joining us again, Max.
It's lovely to see both of you. Really.
Absolutely. Well, we wanted to bring you back on, and I guess why we put the word emergency podcast in the title is since we had you on last time, my oh my, how have things changed with the economy, everything that's going on. And I saw that you had given a recent presentation at a conference that maybe we could dig into today. I don't know, Scott, anything on your mind before we get into that?
Oh, boy, this would be a rough transition to that. But clearly that there's got these Twitter layoffs going on. And Max, we're curious of your thoughts on those.
Cool. Sounds good. I mean, you literally want to know that right now.
Well, we're gonna have to work on these transitions. Clearly, it's super early right now. I probably look like Michael Jackson at the end of the Thriller video. That's the way I feel right now.
Okay.
Yeah. So for those who are listening, just because of time differences from Max being in the UK, me being in the Central Time Zone in the US, and Scott being on the West Coast, it's actually like 7 a.m. Scott's time. And the coffee shops haven't even opened up yet. So this could be an interesting recording today for sure.
Scott looks plenty awake to me from where I'm.
Yeah.
What's the required distance from the screen again, Scott? You know, on podcast number 2, you gave us a good lesson on that.
Oh, I think boy, that was a long time ago. I distinctly remember like reading this study while at the Munich airport. But is essentially that the closer you sit to the screen, the more intimate that feeling. And so like people that are like 24 inches away, that's way closer than you would normally be in any other conversation. So thanks, Mac. Yeah, I do consciously like try and back away from the
I
screen.
don't even get my relationship partners come within that sort of distance to me. So, you know, I'm never going to do it soon.
Totally.
That shut Cole up completely.
Yeah. Well, and while Scott's backing away, I'm actually getting closer just because I keep getting told that my microphone's not loud enough. So I'm like talking to the microphone, Cole. Be very sensual, ASMR, you know, do what the people want. Give them what they want.
Yeah,
Well,
if I could get further away while Cole's doing that, I would.
You see, that's very interesting. You know that I used to have a sex and relationship show on London's LBC radio. It's called London Broadcast Radio.
I'm
Oh.
so glad we brought this up. Tell us more, Max,
It was
please.
all about relationships and closeness and stuff. That was the link and the transition there.
No, I love it. I've been meaning to talk to you about this. So, like, Max, and again, I mentioned he had a very varied career. You've actually been, you know, like, would you call it a talk show host? I don't know what the appropriate term is.
I was actually the regular guest. So it would have been someone's show, and they said tonight, I remember one episode started by saying, tonight on the show, we have the devil. Because what I'd done was created something called a dating eligibility value indicator level, where you do like a little 10 questions test, and the person that you fancy does the test as well. And then you can compare your scores, and it predicts how well your relationship will work together.
You were like the original Match.com.
That was the original Match.com. I mean, that is what my PhD was on, you know, what makes happy couple relationships. That was my, and there was a big connection to people analytics in that, because if I hadn't done that, I would never have discovered that you can't look at teams of people, whether it's a team of 2 people, as in a relationship, or a team of 10 people in an organization. You can't use linear regression when you are doing that kind of work. You can't predict engagement scores or use engagement scores or look at team performance, because those scores are not independent of each other. And in relationships, it's really easy to see why. Because you show me somebody, you say, how happy are you in your romantic relationship? And they say, yeah, I'm not that happy. And then what is the chances that when you go to their partner and you say, how do you feel about it? What's the chances that they're going to say the same thing? And the chances are extremely high, because if one person's unhappy, so is the other person. So those scores are not independent. And one of the rules that you may recall from many years ago when you were doing these things is that when you do regression, if the scores are correlated in any way, that means that the coefficients in the model will be inflated. And so you have to use other techniques like
autocorrelation, definitely. So do opposites really attract, or is it more about the congruency of, I don't know, interests and behaviors?
Great question. So really what it boils down to is communication between the couple, between the partners. So that accounts for about 60-70% of the variance.
Go figure.
Well, exactly. And funnily enough, but the role of personality is still super interesting, even though it only accounts for 10%. But the study was sponsored by a couples relationship counseling organization. So can you imagine if the finding had been that personality is the biggest factor for determining relationship happiness, because no amount of counseling is going to change that. But one of the fascinating findings, and here's one for you guys as psychologists, is that out of all the 5 personality traits, there's no question that neuroticism is the biggest one. So if you have a neurotic partner, it's really tough having a positive relationship. And then the next one is agreeableness, and then the other 3 are kind of marginal. But when you're looking at personality at work, for work performance, so relationship performance, work performance, kind of personality only accounts for 10% of relationship performance, but a whole bunch more than that in work. So it's like when you close the door in the morning and say, bye-bye, darling, and you go to work, personality counts for nothing. And you get to work and say, hello, team. And now your personality is critical. So that's never been able to understand that. Maybe
like dating a girl with like borderline personality disorder is fun until it isn't. And then your life is absolutely ruined, right?
Exactly.
Sounds like you know from experience, Scott.
Exactly.
Hey, well, do you mind if I go on a quick tangent going back to one of the things that you said, Max? And I'm curious if you even have an opinion on this. You said that communication is one of the biggest variables in play for a relationship to be effective, and that's similar to team effectiveness. And then when, probably a decade ago now, Google published the big Project Oxygen using Amy Edmondson's research on psychological safety. And if I really boil down psychological safety to its core, it's like, can you communicate effectively even in a diverse group with competing opinions, which seems very much like a relationship. So is it really just communication at work too? Is psychological safety the same thing in relationships?
That's a good question. The answer, of course, is that it's mediated by, now the question is, which way is the mediation? So is the impact of communication on, what was your outcome variable there, Cole?
I guess it was team effectiveness. I can't remember. It's been a while since I've read it.
So it's quite interesting. Is the relationship of personality on team effectiveness mediated by communication? Or does communication have a big impact but is mediated by your personality? And to my mind, I'm guessing here, but I think that would have something to say. You're a good communicator, but if your personality is highly neurotic, I think that's going to bring your communication down. It may be moderated rather than mediated. Boy, we're getting into the nerdery early here.
We got there right away. We didn't even have, when you joined us last time, the nerdery didn't exist, Max. That's how crazy it is. It's been a while.
Yeah, but in this life, you have to adapt to the new very quickly.
Well, I guess you get the sticker for not just number one guest, but number one fan, Max. So I know you follow us, and it's not a Monday that doesn't go by that I get an email from you at 3 a.m. my time with all the feedback on the podcast episode. So appreciate the feedback.
While I'm on the cross. And now I've got a new pattern, because I know you're going to want to dig into what happened to the provocation and all that. But I have a new thing which I'm trying now, not that it's successful yet, but that actually I do a live stream of consciousness on the post where you advertise the new podcast. So, as you say something about, hey, well, what is productivity? And then I that's where I comment, but not that anybody responds to my comments on that side.
Yeah, Scott, did you see Max doing that? I did it on Craig's episode, and I was like, what the hell is going on here?
I love that so much, Max. That's wonderful. I have to go check it out. No, I treat it very much like in the door, out the door. So once it's out the door,
gone.
We don't mess with it anymore. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's one thing that is interesting. I just want to quickly circle back to Cole's idea about the oxygen study and stuff like that. And this idea that your personality has a different impact on home domestic relationship versus work relationship. And I kind of wonder, is that because the outcome is mediated by work goal? In other words, work effectiveness versus emotional effectiveness, if I can use that term, at home. And the way you behave at home, because you're emotionally attached, personality has a different effect. So what I'm getting at here is that what happens if we brought more emotion into the workplace? Now, I know Cole gets very afraid when I talk about emotion in the workplace.
Shut up, Max.
No one's ever cried on our podcast. I'm going to be the first one to cry on the podcast. But seriously, so if we had Scott's idea of actualization being an important outcome at work, so you'd need to be a bit of an activist, because in capitalism, it's kind of difficult to persuade anybody that there's anybody other than the shareholders that you have to please. But if you did please people emotionally at work, then personality might start taking on more of a role like it does in your romantic relationship in the work. And there wouldn't be such a distinction between work and home either.
Quite possibly, but the outcome variables are also different. In the office, you're talking about like team harmony and this sort of things. It's also like a production outcome measure. So like how is production measured? Well, some of it's like conscientiousness because we know we do everything right and this sort of thing. In the home, it's more of didactic harmony, like nothing's going on. That's how you know that things are going okay.
I think that's really interesting. So if we were to say that a romantic couple harmony, why is that different? Let's say you have a team of two. In fact, this was, do you know, my PhD was initially going to be about the relationship between a chairperson and the CEO in an organization, because that's a dyad.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
An important dyad. And, people have said, hey, when are you going to compare the dynamics of a chairman CEO relationship to a couple relationship, which is an interesting question. But to you then, Scott, harmony between a couple, two partners, and harmony between chairman and CEO, are they really of a different quality?
I think that is definitely one dimension. The added dimension in the office place is productivity, or I guess at that level, it's probably shareholder value. You're delivering some sort of results.
That's what I'm saying. That's my argument. That's why it's different, is because the outcome is you're delivering something. So you'll tolerate a lot more from people you don't like at work because you're all hopefully working towards a common vision. Whereas at home, if you're not working towards a common vision, that relationship's probably going to not do so well because the communication will die. Because conflict is defined in relationships as being where two people in a relationship have got different goals, very different goals that can't be compromised. And as soon as you get to different goals, that is where we get conflict from in relationships. Now, at work, that's kind of easier to manage because hopefully we all have the same goal at work. So conflict should be less. And so
that hopefully is doing a lot of heavy lifting there.
Well, exactly. I bet your boss would say to you that, I bet your boss would say that they hope that there's a lot less conflict at work, or that there isn't conflict at work.
And you can also subdivide conflict into like task conflict. We disagree on how we should proceed and like what the ultimate goal is. And there's also relationship conflict, which is, Cole, I hate you. Max,
I like you though.
See, we're in conflict.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's true. I kind of define conflict as the stuff that makes your cortisol go up and your heart go, racing in a bad way. So, I mean, you could have task disagreement and your heart could still do all of those things. It's how you interpret it. Anyway,
and there's people that thrive on that too. They love getting those situations where they're in conflict.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I'm seeming to find myself more and more recently. I don't really know why. I'm not trying to get there. But I do have a question, Max. To something you brought up a minute ago about businesses being all about shareholder value, but then there's also kind of like what you might call humanist concerns about the employees, how they're feeling and all that, and those two things somewhat being in conflict. Because I follow your stuff, obviously. We've talked quite a bit. We've had you on the podcast. I think you're a brilliant mind. How do you personally, especially when you're consulting with organizations, how do you square those two notions? How do you know when to put on the red activist jacket that you were talking about earlier and when to focus solely on shareholder value from kind of a ruthless pragmatist perspective?
I'm a consultant, Cole. I follow what my sponsor wants me. So if my sponsor is really shareholder driven, I follow what the sponsor says. It's not my job to change the culture unless that is the job I've been given. But normally the job I've been given is to change a process or to instill some workforce capability into the organization. That's a real chicken answer on my part, isn't it?
Yeah,
but
it is.
It is. But the bottom line is we operate, and we can pretend as much as we want to on this podcast and amongst our mates that we really care about the employees and that engagement and employee experience is really important. And we even have a counseling stress line for our employees. Obviously we all know the only reason the counseling stress line is there is because stressed employees are less productive and make less money for the shareholders. There's no niceness to employees at the shareholder level. There just isn't room for it. If you introduced that formally in capitalism would fall down. It wouldn't be capitalism anymore. So I don't believe that successful companies, that part of their fabric is being nice to employees for the employees' sake. They are nice to employees. You sit down and you say, "Hey, Cole, how's your week going, man? How are the kids?" You may do that from a human spot, but there's every chance that some managers are asking you that because they know if they don't, Cole might leave or Cole might not work as well, etc. So I don't believe that organizations are geared towards employees being happy for their own sake so much as they're geared towards employees being happy for the shareholders' sake.
Yeah, I have similar thoughts around corporate social responsibility initiatives where it's like, hey, it's great that you want to do things for the environment, this sort of thing, but in the end, it really feels like a marketing play to promote the company and this sort of thing. And there's two good examples of that, and there's a way to do it well and there's a way to do it poorly. So like in Houston, there's Mattress Mac. He let everyone in. He has like just a million mattress stores, this sort of things. During the hurricanes, he lets people in. They can sleep on the mattresses. Everyone loves him. They go buy mattresses from him. BP had an oil spill. They out in the Gulf of Mexico. They went out and cleaned it up, and then it cost them like $10 million. Then they spent like $50 million advertising how much good they did cleaning up ducts and this sort of thing. So that there's, in the end, it benefits the bottom line.
Did you see that South
I still
Park
think about that South Park episode where he's like, "Sorry, we're so sorry."
Lying in front of the fire. That was
Yeah.
No, I agree 100%. And well, isn't that what they call greenwashing, Scott?
Greenwashing. I've never heard this term before.
Oh, greenwashing is where you do something, you do something that you actually have to do, maybe like pay green taxes, and then
Yes.
you create a huge advertising campaign out of it afterwards. Say, hey, this is what we're doing for the planet. Well, no, you're kind of doing that for the planet because if you didn't do that, your directors would go to jail. So don't. It's like the stress line. You didn't put in the counseling stress line because you love your employees and give them extra hours off. You know that if you don't give them those extra hours off and flexible working, that they're going to join your competitor. Some people, it's a little bit like a Turing test, is that you can't actually tell the reason at the end. And maybe we need a Turing test for work. Is the reason that the company is doing this intervention for the benefit of the employee or for the benefit of the shareholder? And you'd need a really clever Turing test to tell you what's really in the mind of the executive.
Well, I think this segues nicely into like the Twitter layoffs where Elon Musk took over a company. Now his money's on the line. He has to turn a profit, show some value from it. And there's a lot of employees that ostensibly were not doing a whole lot. He let go like 75% of the company, and Twitter's doing pretty freaking well now. At least the service hasn't been interrupted or anything like that. So, I mean, it's great to like create an environment where everyone can like self-actualize and this sort of thing. But at the end of the day, it's a company. They make money. That's the whole purpose.
Yes. So you would need to change the whole fabric of the company, as you suggested, Scott. You're the one who brought up the idea of actualization. But what you've just said is 100% true. The nice thing about Elon Musk, South Africans can be fairly straightforward people, they say. I don't. But he is pure. There's no messing around with Elon. So when Elon says something, generally that he means it. It could be because he's a little bit spectrumy in some ways, and so he can't hide it. Like we're sorry. he can't hide that. And so if you want to look at capitalism at its absolute best, Elon shows you what it is. And maybe Elon, do you guys, is Mad Magazine still going in the US? Do you know what that is, even Mad Magazine?
I know what it is. I've never looked at it though. They used to have a show called Mad TV as well. It was based on the same thing.
So there was a thing called a great series called The Shadow Knows. It used to come up every now and again. And for example, there'd be somebody on a date, and the guy would be sitting there saying, "Oh, that's so interesting. Gosh, you do flower arrangement on the weekends. Oh, gosh, that's so interesting." But his shadow, was leching. So the shadow knows what's really going on in the person's head. And with Elon Musk, you don't need the shadow to tell you what's going on. Elon just, he's at the date, he would be leching from day one. And so I'm with you, Scott. This could be a really short discussion, couldn't it? Because in a sense, we're all agreeing that organizations are primarily about shareholder value. And Scott says that the organization would collapse if it wasn't like that. We all kind of agree that you have to make a semblance towards people, if not to pretend that you like what they're doing, in order to go, in order to keep employees happy. But there was those, I've forgotten the name. What was the name of the experiments with the lights in the manufacturing?
Hawthorne effect.
And I read somewhere in the Atlantic. You guys ever read the Atlantic? There's fairly good
sometimes
detailed arguments. There's a really good article that said, discussed the role of HR in organization, and said that the Hawthorne experiments, as you know, they changed the lighting, etc., to see what would happen to productivity. And one of the key outcomes was that it's not the lighting that made much difference. It was the fact that people were being watched that improved productivity. And so that sort of finding, they say, was the birth of HR. And they say that the role of HR in an organization is to improve employee productivity without improving employee reward or improving employee work conditions. So how can we squeeze more out of employees without paying them more or improving their condition? That is and the Hawthorne experiment was all about that. How can we change the lighting so that they'll manufacture more so that we don't have to pay them? I mean, one of the interventions could have been, hey, let's pay them more. So we'll have we'll have a control group and different experimental groups, each paid at a slightly different level, and we'll see at what pay level does the work improve. But that's not what they do in business psychology, is it? Business psychology is all about changing the conditions. Employee experience, yeah, that we can change. That's cheap. How about employee engagement? Yeah, we can cheap. Or innovation, or let's put the person's photograph on the front of the company magazine. That'll make them happy. But one of the options is not let's pay them more. Sorry, Cole.
Well, I want to come back to the Twitter thing here in a second, but before we get into that, I want to go on a little bit of a tangent. Are you saying that, like, just bringing kind of the Hawthorne studies full circle into the present, is that the reason why we're seeing such an uptick in employee surveillance technologies? Is to try to increase the productivity of folks without paying them more, without increasing their work conditions?
By definition. I mean, Dilbert captured it. I've never been able to find that particular strip, but it was the day that everybody started wearing, watches and stuff to monitor. And Egbert or Dilbert, one of the engineers says, these watches, what are they doing with them? And the evil HR director, Catbert, comes in and says, they're for your benefit. It's so that we can see when you're stressed, to ensure that you are working, that your pulse, your heart rate is really low, when you need breaks, etc. That's why, well, that's okay then. And then Catbert kind of goes to the 18th floor into his dark office and gets onto, the microphone and says, cubicle number 732, heart rate isn't high enough. Give him more work. Now,
I think that's probably part of the reason why people like the working from home so much, because they're not under the scrutiny of other people or their bosses all the time. There's tons of people that go to work and they just kind of hate their jobs. It's probably because of this monitoring that they endure.
And when I raised this, Barry, we'll tell you the story sometime if you want to hear it from People Analytics, where Barry Swale. But I was on the stage in a conference with somebody from a watch company that shall remain nameless. And, they were saying, yeah, we can monitor how many hours you sleep at night and it'll be really good for you. And I'm saying, in what possible world can that, would you need to know that? The guy said, well, if you're an airline pilot, okay, how many airline pilots are there sitting in the audience today? So for most it's not really the company's job to know how many hours and for your performance rating potentially to be measured on that. Did you know that most of the audience were Gen Y and maybe a couple of Gen Zs, and that they all disagreed with me? And I thought, what? I would have thought that this generation would be on my side, didn't want to be surveilled and monitors exactly as you're suggesting. But because I grew up in an age where we weren't surveilled and now we are, I can see the difference between living in a time where you weren't surveilled and I can compare it to a time where we are. And I guess you guys are just about of an age as well, where you can also remember a time where you weren't surveilled. People who've grown up in the surveilled age, it's all they know. It's like lobster in the warm.
Totally used
well,
to it.
you grew up, Max, and this is meant to be a double entendre before 1984, so good for you.
Well, there was also serious consequences, like back in the day, to government overreach and this sort of thing into people's lives. And like as you mentioned, a lot of the Gen Z and millennials grew up with technology and haven't really seen any negative consequences from it that they're aware of. Like at most, it's better advertising towards them.
One manager at a company that gave everybody Fitbits, I had a chat. I know them very well. People analytics manager. And I said, how do you feel about grabbing all this data about your employees? He said, Max, I can assure you that the culture of our company is such that we would only use it for their good. Funnily enough, Cole, you look up to the heaven like that. With this particular person, I actually believe them because I know them personally and they are very, ethical, etc. I said, you are X, but what about the person who's going to take over from you and has all of this data? So it's no good basing your ethics and integrity on the manager today. It's kind of what's the manager in the future going to do with that data? That's the scare. And I think that is where Gen Z, I'm not the first person to say this. I'm not sure if they fully appreciate the implications of having all their data out there now when it's going to come to their future performance reviews. If indeed we're still having performance reviews, if everything hasn't gone outsourced, automated, gig, etc.
You had a uptick in your heartbeat when the CEO was on the stage at the all hands. Therefore, you're high performing.
Yeah. Did you know, I saw a really cool study in the city in London, which is the equivalent of Wall Street, where they had an experimental group with bond traders, so guys dealing in kind of billion dollar bonds, and they were measuring their blood and their brain waves and stuff while they were trading in order to, and what would happen is if they didn't like what they saw on the brainwave and in the blood, you are pulled off the floor when your brain gets, literally pulled off the floor when your brain gets to a point that might impact your trading negatively. Now, you might say that's a good thing for my commission, etc. But we're now at that point where we are literally looking at what your brain is doing at work. And the silly example is one of a newspaper in the UK measured how many times everybody went to the bathroom during the day at work. That was stopped, thank God.
Missing minerals? 99% of us are. Concentrate's Daily Mineral Powder helps restore what your body's missing, naturally supporting mood, energy, and immunity. Get yours now at traceminerals.com.
Can I go back to something, Max? I think this is a really important point about the Fitbit example, but I think it could apply to any of the examples you just gave about like drawing blood or going to the restroom as well, which is if that data is being collected, regardless of the, let's call it the virtue of the person who's collecting it at the time. And I think this is kind of the transition I want to make back to the Twitter example is like, well, what if you have the ruthless pragmatist leader that comes into an organization and says, people analytics, I demand more productivity from your team, and I need it from your Fitbit or from drawing the blood or from going to the restrooms, or you're no longer going to be employed at this organization. What happens then? Like what should happen? What does happen? And I think because I really think this is a really important topic at this moment in time.
It's huge. Firstly, I think it's already happening, what you've just described. I think it literally, people look at performance and are starting to get more and more objective measures of performance of people. And although they wouldn't admit it, I think they are using it to decide whether. So if I do a study for an organization, say I want to create, I love profiling. So when I'm profiling the ideal employee for a particular role in terms of various psychometrics and things like that, one of the things that I do is I guarantee all of the employees in the organization that I will be the only person who sees their individual data. And I can stick to that because I'm an external. And I can just say, I've promised everybody only I'm going to do it. But the second that they do it internally, employees don't have that level of protection. I have to in any ways because I'm a registered psychologist. So, I would get into big trouble if I broke that promise. Whereas an internal employee, since there isn't a law against, that's kind of the restriction, which is why it comes back to the red jacket, is the activist jacket. You're not going to change that until the whole context, the law changes around that. I have some faith in Gen Z, funnily enough, that they will change that. So when they start becoming the next generation of CEOs, maybe it's more of a hope that I have. Because I'd really like to see Scott's actualization idea be one of the outcomes that we look for. You ask the average psychologist, do they know how to measure actualization? The answer is probably going to be no.
Well, the thing I think about is I just wish this discussion was happening in more forums than on this podcast, right? I just don't see it's like such a relevant issue to what's going on in the world, and it's not being discussed, or if it is being discussed, it's completely behind closed doors. And I believe that sunlight is the best disinfectant, but we've kind of gotten heavy here for a second. I think we should lighten it up a little bit. Max, I think we've got some rapid fire questions for you. Do you want to take a shot at those?
Sure.
Well, what I love about Max is we came in with a modest agenda and he totally blew it. We went totally off the rails.
Can I just respond to Cole's last comment about
please do.
Got kind of heavy there, and you'd love to have sunshine and sunlight on the thing to make it open. I'd love to see you try doing that with a bunch of employees. Who would be stupid enough to open their mouth as a senior employee? Sorry, if you're unionized, different story, because you're going to say what you think anyway. No, nobody who's not in a union and in a reasonably good position, who's earning a nice salary, who's got kids to put through college, etc., who's going to open their mouth and say, yeah, we should change the social fabric and the law in the context of the thing. Okay, that's the end of the darkness.
Okay,
fair enough.
Let's head to the light. Okay, so Max is a Brit, so we got a very British version.
I'm South African born, by the way.
Well, shit, man. I messed this all up then. Have you ever seen the documentary Waiting for Sugar Man? Searching for Sugar Man.
Well, funny you should say that because he's more famous in South Africa than he is anywhere else in the world. So.
Yes, he's like the Elvis there, but he's from Detroit.
Is he the Elvis? Is that how you say Sugar Man?
Very good.
All the colors to my dream. Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know if I can substitute South African stuff in here, but okay. First one: British Museum or British pub?
What's the second one?
British pub.
Museum.
Museum every day.
No question.
Okay, a dapper suit or a tracksuit?
Tracksuit.
Tracksuit. What about you, Cole? You want to dress up or sweatsuit? Sweatpants?
Trying to think. I mean, if I based it on probability, it's probably the dapper suit, just because I don't think I even own a tracksuit.
Okay, Max. When you're in line at Tesco, do you talk to people online or just leave them alone?
I did when I came here. I've now learned to shut up.
Same in Seattle, boy. Coming from
I can
Texas.
beat that though. I can beat that kind of when my mom from South Africa came to visit me for the first time. So when you get off the boat and you're very fresh in a new country, you kind of don't know anything about the culture. And so mom, bless her, 70, 75, whatever it was, gets on a tube, the city tube, the same kind of Wall Street type that we were talking about earlier. And everybody's in their sort of suits because it was like 1997. And they're very unhappy looking at their papers, etc. And mom's just speaking to everyone, which is rule number one. Ever. Isn't this exciting being on a tube underground to these people who are like being carried to the death camp daily? You know, and she said, isn't this exciting? One person had mercy on her and smiled and said, yes, it's lovely.
I relate to your mother immensely. Coming from Texas to Seattle, people here don't talk. Seattle
you want to talk and be nice to, yeah, exactly.
Okay. Do you trust Doctor Who?
I can't stand Doctor Who.
Really? Really?
I'm not. Can't. I don't know. I think I can't. I was going to say you had to be born here, but then you weren't, and you love Doctor Who. So why do you love it, Scott?
I love the 2005 to current version, but the 70s version, well, I guess probably 60s. It's a little low budget and hard to follow, honestly. But
you just need a phone box kind of thing.
Cole, do you even know who Doctor Who is?
I was going to say, Cole's got that that look on his face.
You guys, you're always talking about stuff. Like, actually, I do know who Doctor Who is. I've just never watched it.
Okay.
You know,
isn't it just so make sure I'm sure it's the main character changes every season, right? That's the only thing I know about the show.
He morphs definitely whenever the characters kind of run its course.
Okay.
If I were to say that Cole thought that Doctor Who was Pete Townsend, would anybody find that understand? Like, she totally gets that.
That big 70s hair. That's the old, yeah. Okay, like on the musical tip, the ultimate British question: Paul McCartney or John Lennon?
Oh, this came up in one of your very early podcasts, the Beatles. That's a tough question. Oh God, that you're really making me choose between chocolate or well, I like.
So on the Paul side, you have like Let It Be and
I can play most of their music even.
Really?
Yeah, I have a recording studio up there.
Max is also an old musician as well, which we have not gotten onto in the podcast either.
I did not know that.
He's a musician rather than an old musician, but yes, I let that one slide.
Well, I was referencing your
You're not a young musician or an old. You are
I was referencing your short bout of fame as being a musician, Max, not your age.
I understand. If I have to choose, I would say John, because he was kind of deeper and more mysterious.
Ooh. And
I like the mysterious. Paul's great, but kind of surface, romantic. I enjoyed his work in Wings, just for its. I still play Wings very loudly. 1985. All that stuff, but yeah, I'd have to say John Lennon, and I think John wrote more complicated music, more complex music.
He did, and his life was obviously cut short, and we don't know what would have happened.
Yeah, that's
later
true.
on. But you want to do some nerdery?
Let's do some nerdery.
John Ono, yeah,
Mr. John Ono. Let's see. Check this out. Okay, so this goes along with that Tesco question. So a survey went out, 50,000 responses to a question of how many people do you talk to and how does it relate to personal life satisfaction? And the finding was the more people you talk to,
the more satisfied you are with life.
Yeah, the more people you talk to, the happier you are in life. And it's even beyond number of close connections that you have. So, like, even just talking to people in this line at the grocery store has a great impact on your overall life satisfaction.
I think it's true because I think it's built into our genetics. Human genes are social genes. We're born into relationships, we live in relationships, and we die in relationships. And people who don't are going against what the genes tell them to do, and therefore they are less in tune with the gene, and therefore.
Well, just to extend that point, Mac, if we weren't social creatures, what you would find in like the rainforest and in like the undiscovered parts of the world is a lot of hermits, people living by themselves and thriving instead of communities, which is what you do find. And so it's completely invalidatable to say we are social creatures. One of the things I actually really like about what you shared, Scott, is it's not just that you have more connections versus less connections. It was the variety of types of connections, like you might even call it the diversity of connections, that really led the most to like that satisfaction, which I thought was brilliant.
We see this in a variety of our network findings as well, specifically that people that are clustered onto teams and don't have any other outlet are unhappy and they leave organizations. And I think this might be part of what's going on with the Great Resignation. We all went into this like pandemic sequestering sort of mind frame, and we lost those connections to outside folks that you didn't see in the office anymore.
But here's the thing. Our brains were evolved on the Pleistocene.
Yes.
And they would have been evolved, they are evolved, to a certain critical size of group, like, span of management sort of thing. Now, because of being online, the numbers that we have to deal with socially, etc., our brain is not geared to those. I mean, our brain is not geared to a whole bunch of stuff. So we are geared to seek out information from around us for survival purposes and for mating purposes, etc. But what happens to a brain that's designed for that much information to go onto Instagram and Facebook and whatever and be faced with that much information? What happens to the brain? Well, we do know that the right amount of information generates some dopamine, which is what you've just described. You speak to people in the supermarket, get a little dopamine rush. What happens if you take that dopamine and push it off the scale with social media? At what point does it become dysfunctional? And how many million years of evolution is it going to take for the brain to catch up? So my advice generally, and I've written quite a bit about this and done quite a lot of TV work on this, is that kids, especially kids, should be restricted in the amount of stimuli that they get from social media to try and keep it in line with what the brain is. Once they're not kids anymore, it's up to them. You can say, and this is not a control freak thing for your kids. This is just saying, I am going to try and keep your stimulus levels to what I think the brain was designed to do. And that's it. And one interesting thing that I saw is that, did you know that kids from very wealthy families that go to kind of the private schools, etc., they are very restricted in the amount of social media that they're allowed to consume. So they have tend to have at Eton boarding school in the UK, that there's only a certain number of hours of social media that you're allowed to do. Whereas kids who are not from those wealthy, successful, big backgrounds, they have unlimited. And what that does is it creates a set of haves and have-nots. And these are the consumers for these people here, because they are not reactive. They are proactive producers. This group, because their brains are so dopamine, tend to be consumers. So I think that's contributing to the world we're seeing. Sorry, Scott.
No, I think that is a really interesting point. There might be like a third variable there. So like you see these studies of like the more books that are in the house, the better the child is when they actually finally develop. And this may speak to just ability and time to parent. So if you're, lower income, lower earning, you don't have necessarily the same amount of time and effort to monitor social media.
And I don't remember what the answer was, but when you have this huge group of people, are kids today, because I don't keep up with this, not my field anymore, but do kids today still maintain an inner circle of intimates, like, 10? I mean, I had 4 or 5, one bestie, 4 or 5 inner circle, 10 outer, and then the world. But is that still a meme with up and coming generations? Is it a thing?
I don't know.
Interesting.
It is an interesting question.
That would really change the fundamental fabric of society if it doesn't exist anymore. But I do not know the answer to that.
I also
I hope someone's researching it.
Just like as a tangent of this, like I wonder about the role of like video conferencing too. In the sense that like some people are better at it than others, and that's going to fundamentally change the way we rate performance and how we work together. And like over time, like I mean, throughout the day, a single day, the more meetings that get stacked up, man, get worn out. But there's got to be people out there just like wildly energized by it, and they're going to thrive.
Well, that's what I was thinking about the research article. It seems like a moderator to what they found could be are these interactions via technology or are they in person? Right? Because I interact with a lot of people, like a vast variety of people, but it's all virtually. And the only people I really see are my family. And so I wonder if that has an impact on my life satisfaction.
I imagine it wouldn't matter because like it's all about exploration and sharing ideas with one another. And to Max's point, the more affluent families, they do engage in a lot more exploration. They visit more diverse places. They have a lot more access to weak tides, if you will.
That's really interesting. I mean, there is research that shows that happiness levels of kids is going down, and I don't think many people dispute that. The question is why. Are we using different measures, maybe? But one of the theories I've had, and I've looked for research on this, and I haven't found it, to Cole's point about having so many meetings and conferences. If you've got two salespeople trying to sell something, I think instinctively a lot of us would probably feel that the one in person is likely to make the sale. And I still think that pheromones have got a role to play in this.
Oh, please, let's not get into this. Okay. Max was saying the creepiest thing to me the other day about like sending people sweaters so you could smell them before you meet with them. I was like, Jesus, Max.
There's something to that. There's something to that.
No, they got it. I mean, they did the research about attractiveness and smell. So they had people anonymized and you had to send your sweater in, and then a potential partner, smelt it, and then they decided whether they liked you, and then they looked at your photo, and then they looked at all the interactions to see, which is more important, the pheromones or the looks of the person that you're doing. But I mean, I am an evolutionary psychologist. Whenever I'm in doubt in psychology, my basic thing is, people say, you're a psychologist, what am I going to do next? And I say, I always just say, what would a dog do next in that situation? Because we are dogs, with a thin veneer of social. And we know that pheromones are important and they exist. If pheromones were important 1 million years ago for attracting people, there's no way that they're not critical a mere million years in evolution. So there must be something that you're not getting from all of this virtual in terms of pheromones, and that could well explain why people are unhappy, and maybe we need pheromones to be happy.
And to your point about the social media, like we grew up, or we evolved on the savannas in the small social clusters that traded when they needed to, and now we have a little box in our hands that can give us access to anybody in the world at any time. It's got to fundamentally change us. We weren't involved to
if you speak to a 22-year-old, but if you speak to a 22-year-old, we were on a meeting in one of the groups that we hold, and I remember somebody from Pepsi, a 22-year-old person from Pepsi, and all the oldies are kind of saying, yeah, you need the pheromones and the face-to-face, not like the old days being pre-COVID, where you actually saw people, and she was kind of bewildered by what we were talking about. She said, I don't know what you mean. I've just joined Pepsi. I've met people from all around the world on Zoom. In fact, they're more inclusive in Zoom meetings than they are in-person meetings, because if there's a picture on the screen of somebody who hasn't spoken for a while, the leader will say, what do you think, X, etc. And so she didn't get it at all that in-person meetings are better. So this is a great controlled experiment in evolutionary psychology that we're living through. And I believe that we will evolve into this will influence our evolution of the human state, without a doubt. Not a bad thing.
Well, I think this is actually a good point to bring up. One of the things we wanted to talk to you about, Max, was this week Mark Benioff from Salesforce was talking about this exact topic of new employees who've never met their coworkers. And because Salesforce, pretty famously made one of the big proclamations that they would never have to come back to the office. And that they were going to be, so enlightened as an employer for doing so. And now Mark Benioff is coming out and saying new joiners to the company are systematically facing lower productivity than people that have been with the organization before. And he attributes this to folks not building tribal knowledge because they're not working with others in the office and perhaps smelling their pheromones. I don't know. But
laugh if you will, but I tell you, there's got to, may not be the pheromones, but there's some, what is it that you get from being in the presence of people that you don't get with a camera? That's the, we started this conversation with 15 centimeters and we have kind of circled back to the same topic. What is it that in person gives you, if not smelling the other person and chemicals that we don't fully understand? I don't believe biology understands them, and I think any biologist would agree with that. But what are you getting face to face that you're not getting with the camera?
This is something that Michael Arena was on super early and super worried about, and I think we're going to see this in other organizations as well, that what you get in the organization is this sort of constrained environment. You get kind of like a tribal mentality that kind of shows you how to operate, the appropriate behaviors, not to mention just like being next to somebody is so much easier to upload and download knowledge than, okay, I want to talk to Cole. I got to like find some time on his calendar, and it's got to be 30 minutes, and all sorts of stuff, as opposed to just like walking over to his desk and asking.
So that tells us, that's a great descriptive statistic that you've provided there. It doesn't say why you can't get that on camera. What is it about being in person? If I wanted 30 minutes with you, I can just pick up a phone or do something and say, Scott, I need 30 minutes, or get onto your Calendly and book 30 minutes with you. There's something about that a camera can't do that being in physical proximity to you can do. We don't know yet whether a virtual you, a hologram of Scott will provide the same effect. So if you were a hologram here, is that the same as a camera, or is a hologram being in the office?
Well, I think you might be onto something, Max, because I feel like the difference is free range of motion. And a hologram would have free range of motion, whereas the camera and how we treat things now does not have free range of motion. But what were you going to add, Scott?
I was going to add, it's not necessarily about like the video conferencing or, perhaps pheromones play some sort of role. I don't know. But it's really about the constrainment. So like if you're in the office, you're in the office. You not only see your teammates, you see other people working, you see people in the other group working, you get to meet them, this sort of thing. But when you're at home, as soon as you log off, you're talking to somebody else outside your organization. You're not getting the full download of behaviors. And we've seen in other studies that it takes 15 repetitions with a single person to develop the same level of trust that you get through one interaction in person. Pipeline or the data download just is not there in a remote environment.
So that is the Hein hypothesis of physical proximity as a reinforcer of organizational culture.
There's also like just like as like a tangent. I online I see a lot of people like almost celebrate laziness too, in the sense of like people are getting these sort of like mechanical or even just programmatic mouse jigglers, so like that they don't appear like they're offline or whatever. And like,
which goes back to the point about employee surveillance from earlier too.
Employee surveillance, this sort of thing. But if you're doing that, that's a bad sign. That's a bad sign. And I think people like to work from home because, they can sit in their bed or whatever, but there might be an aspect of like, I don't have to work when I'm at home as well, which is why it's so liked.
So not wearing a tracksuit at work presumably contributes to the whole culture reinforcement hypothesis of yours.
So you're saying like wearing a suit, a uniform? I mean that's part of coming to the office.
Well, I think it's more about not. I mean, who knows what anybody is wearing below the waist when they're doing video calls?
Totally.
Whereas at the office, you do kind of know. So presumably that contributes to something, having to dress decently for the office, whereas you don't have to dress decently at home.
I mean, like, not to turn this into like a video conferencing sort of conversation, but like in office, you get all of those physical and visual cues of people's body language, how they operate when they're in the break room versus like on camera.
I feel I'm kind of seeing your body language and Cole's body language.
You think so?
Right. Maybe I'm not. Okay, maybe I'm.
Can you see me giving you the middle finger with my right hand?
Yeah. I'll have to come close.
Wow, this podcast is really devolving quickly.
I kid. I love Max. I'm kidding. Obviously.
Yeah, I know.
I don't know if this is an add to the conversation, but one of the things I always think about is this concept of like a few bad apples. Like I imagine the majority of people who are working remotely are working just as studiously as they would in the office. But then there's a few bad apples who ruin it for everybody, just like in many contexts, there's a few bad apples. And so I just wonder, there's probably like a Pareto principle thing at play here where like a small number of people are accounting for the vast majority of bad behaviors or something like this. I don't even know.
I mean, I work infinitely better from home because I need to concentrate. And so from home, I'll work 8 hours without even getting up on something. Right. I could not do that at the office. But if my job required me to interact with people, then I wouldn't be so hot doing it. My work doesn't usually. In fact, bosses always say, Max, we'll pay you more if you don't interact.
I will say, you see, this is like an entire empty floor right now because it's early in the morning, but it's like the size of a football field. There's a million desks, whatever. And last week, I'm sitting here and someone came and said, to my right, like, okay, that's kind of weird. And then someone came and said over there.
Sorry, right next to you.
Well, like there's like dividers here, and they said like in the next little section over. Then like someone came and said over there, and then someone came and said over there, and then someone came and said like right behind me. I'm like, what the fuck is going on? Like is like a team? Then they've taken over the entire floor, and so like I got up and I looked.
Humans are social creatures, Scott.
I guess so because I looked, and there's
restaurants as well. There's one table here. There's an empty restaurant, and then another couple will come in, and they have to sit at the table next. Why?
Exactly. And I was like, I'm trying to be alone here. What the hell, man?
Yeah.
I'm trying to be socially alone.
Well, they're trying to be with other people. That's why they came into the office, probably.
Exactly, but the entire floor was empty except for this one section. Like, why are you sitting next to me?
And they're clustered, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Well, Max, I got a question for you. Do you think Scott, in his explanation a second ago, where he was raising his voice to explain why this is weird, did he sound more persuasive, perhaps?
When he raised his voice?
Yeah.
It was unusual. I mean, Scott does sometimes.
All right, this is turning into a terrible transition. Okay. One of the things that we wanted to talk to you about today is we found an article that talked about people raising their voice in attempt to be more persuasive. And so, yeah. And so it says our natural inclination is to, when we're trying to speak more persuasively, is to talk louder and overall with more variation and volume in your voice. This is an article called How the Voice Persuades. And I thought this was so funny because it reminds me of my family growing up where everybody was always talking a little bit louder than the last person to try to convince them of some point that was going on at the house. And so it was like at some point, everybody's just yelling at each other, trying to convince each other that they're right about some particular topic. So I found this research to be hilarious.
Do you find this in yourself, Cole? Like, do you
think
yes. that you? Yeah,
very much so.
It's cultural as well, though, because if you're in the Mediterranean, You've just been there, Scott. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
You know,
Very true.
Mediterraneans and Latinos, that is, you know, shouting and mannerisms, and that is how you communicate when you want to make a point. You know, it's only in the very tame West, this part of the West, that we kind of, you know, it's the British Reserve, you know, that we expect this logical, quiet, make your point like that. But that, I presume we weren't evolved to be like that.
That's a super solid point, Max, because like when you go to like Italy or somewhere like that, like holy shit, these people are about to fight because like they're like up in each other's face, like da 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 da, and you're like, oh man, and like they're saying like, oh no, we're just talking, we're just having fun.
Yeah. And we admire passion like that generally. You know, I think it's extroversion. You know, it's a characteristic that we admire in others, even if we don't exhibit it ourselves.
I'm surprised that Cole sees himself as getting louder. I see Cole as like a submission fighter. Like he'll go the distance with you. He'll outlast you.
Is that what? Well,
I'm just ribbing on you.
Yeah, just ask my wife or ask my family. They'll tell you a different story.
What they'll tell you that you're quiet and demure.
No, they'll tell you that I raise my voice to try to get more persuasive, and it doesn't work.
Well, you and I have had many discussions over the months. I cannot remember you raising your voice with me. That's probably a huge insult. You know, the fact that you haven't raised your voice with me. You are the most level-speaking guy I know.
Well, because I know most of the time you're just trying to provoke me, and I don't want to get into that.
I think I need to take you out drinking to see more of Cole, basically.
I would, in all seriousness, pheromones aside, I think it would be amazing if the three of us got drinks at some point, because that's actually kind of crazy. I mean, Scott and I have met, but we've never met you, Max, and I feel like I know you really well.
Exactly. You know, and if you think I'm provocative on the phone, wait until.
Oh yeah.
You see, no, it actually doesn't work like that. That's really interesting, because when you're with somebody, you can actually, that is really interesting. When you conflict with somebody, it's much easier to conflict. I'll give you a great example of this, but it's much easier to conflict not in person, on video. When you meet the person or even see them, it takes it out. And I'll tell you an example of this, is that I was interviewing some executive about a project that we were running, and this person did not want to speak to me. Busy, you're coming in here, you're running the organization, which meant they weren't going to be boss anymore, etc. And the line kind of broke up, and I said, do you mind if we switch this to a Zoom call rather than a mobile call? And so we switched to Zoom, and we could see each other, the entire tone of the conversation. Delighted to help you, rational answers, and you know, in person, next level, it probably would have been even better. So there's definitely something about the anonymity of not being seen, then having a video, then being in person.
You see this on like social media. Like people say the most vile things you've ever read on social media, but if you had to say it to someone's face, you would never do it.
Yeah, there's a pub. There's the pub example. You know, the internet as being a large pub. Is that people, there's certain things you would never say to somebody in a pub that you would say even on the internet, for example.
Yeah. People are jerks. I don't know. How about we wrap it there? I mean, I feel like this has been one of our more stream of consciousness episodes, but I think it's going to be fun for the audience. So, Max, thank you so much for joining us for round 2 on Directionally Correct. We'll see if there's a round 3. I don't know. Scott, any final words?
That we plan to discuss about techniques for people analytics people to raise their visibility in the organization, the 6 steps that you need to follow to get your function to be known. That you mean that?
Max, you blew up the agenda. You can't put it back together. You know? we had things we wanted to talk to you about. It's too late now. I don't know. Scott, sorry. Scott, any final words?
Max, we'll get in a pub, you, me, and Cole someday, and we'll say terrible things to each other.
Cannot
definitely.
wait for that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for joining us today. You've been listening to Directionally Correct, the People Analytics Podcast with Cole and Scott. Thanks, Max.
Festivities. Have a good one.
Stick around for part 2 where we actually talk about people analytics.
So the whole idea of people analytics is to create a set of workforce capability. And it doesn't matter what you're doing in people analytics, whether you're creating a dashboard, writing a program in R, whatever gives you your jollies in life. If you can't convince somebody that leads to a workforce capability that your organization needs to deliver one of its business outcomes, you are not doing people analytics. You are having fun. You doing? Technology. You're having fun. The reason you went into people analytics is presumably because you enjoy R, in your case, Scott, and my case as well. And I enjoy multi-level modeling and complicated statistic techniques. And as a consultant, if somebody wants to pay me to write a meaningless multi-level model, it's been done. An organization came to me. I'll tell you, here's a great example. Said, Max, this is an example of why people analytics needs to be strategy-led and not data-led. Whenever I see this expression, data-led, I want to go nuts because it's not starting with the business. It's business-led or strategy-led. And some organization came to me once and said, Max, could you please trawl all of our learning and development data and show us that the huge investment of $20 million a year that we're making has some positive outcomes. And I said, well, that's not the way to do it. You're asking me to look for random correlations in your data, which may or may not exist. And of course, I didn't find any. There's no way, that you're going to, 0.2, with a P of like point or something like that. And that was, and they paid me for it. Certainly they bought my time, but that wasn't people analytics. That was tinkering with numbers, and I had a lot of fun doing it, and I made lots of spectacular graphs. And they loved it. He went and showed it to his boss and said, look at this, boss. The guy said, wow, those are so colorful and so round. Well, mind you, did have some pie chart.
What would have been the how should have gone down? How should have gone down?
Should have gone down by somebody saying, Max, we're really interested in finding out what are the drivers of productivity? Or Max, what are the drivers of sales in the organization? And I would have looked at the drivers and gone through so talent management, leadership, and I would have gone through a whole bunch of workforce capabilities, efficiency, retention. Yeah. And I would have looked at each of those and I would have said, right, I would have put together a nice regression type, more like might have been able to use regression, a nice regression model, and I would have said, right, what is the R squared of that model? Does it contribute to those? And if the answer is no, then we know that those things are not the right things for generating the business outcome of productivity that they're looking for. But today, as Elon Musk is very keen to tell us, we are not starting with the business outcome like the productivity or the customer growth, etc. You've got people in technology in particular, it's not just people analytics, IT, who love IT. That's why they went and studied IT at university and do this stuff. And then they come to work and they play with whatever data is available. Sometimes they'll generate some new data if they're not looking at what's in Workday or SuccessFactors or whatever. But mostly they play with data. They get very good effect sizes and very low Ps and stuff like that. And they present it to somebody, and somebody who also doesn't really know much about the business strategy looks at it and says, wow, what a significant result. And you say, well, can I connect that to a business outcome? I mean, it's very nice that you had a great week, a great month, a great project, but what's that done for us? And I think that's the issue with people analytics.
Yeah, productivity for productivity's sake. And I think like back to like the work from home sort of deal. You saw like an uptick in productivity when people left the office, and I wonder if like some of that is just them, shuffling papers around. Like to your point, like it's not really linked to anything. You create a dashboard, no one uses it, but you spent all this time and all your 40 hours in your week is all gone. You were productive.
yeah, but there's no single definition for productivity.
True.
That exists today. However, given any person's role, I will hypothesize, and I mean, in my own organization, everybody had a productivity measure of some sort, and they had to work to it, or they had to convince me that it was the wrong productivity measure for them and that we needed a new one. And so one of the first things I do with teams is to say, what can I measure you on, please, and make it the employees from day one.
Do you mind if I go on a quick diatribe here? Because I have really strong feelings about this.
Dude.
And so one of the things we wanted to talk to you about today, Max, was your People Analytics Camp presentation. I also had a presentation at that conference as well. And during the Q&A session with the moderators afterwards, they asked me a question about what we're talking about right now, which is like the productivity of people analytics teams and kind of how do we justify our existence. And I said, when I led people analytics teams in the past, I always had a figure that we literally calculated to try to pay for ourselves 10 times over every year, meaning add up all the salaries, all the technology spend, all the resources together as the denominator of how much our team costs, and then show the ROI of all of our projects stacked on top of each other. And if you stack all those projects on top of each other, that it should pay for itself 10 times more than our team cost. And the moderator asked me, he said, do any other people analytics teams do this? And I said, not that I know of. I've asked other people, and I've extended the challenge to other people to do this. And hopefully this podcast can serve as an extension of that challenge. I even talked with somebody about it yesterday as an idea. They were like, hey, we may be getting cut with layoffs. And Cole, what would you do? And I said, show the ROI of yourself, try to pay for yourself 10 times over, and see if that, creates traction with your leaders. So that's my prescription, because it's going to be really tough for the CEO of an organization to cut a business unit who's paying for itself 10 times over. And the thing, and here's the real fear. Here's the real fear, because this is where the diatribe will end, is that a lot of people analytics teams know that they're not doing work that will pay for itself. And that's the zinger that I want to leave with. And I'll turn it back over to you, Mac.
No. Cole, I mean, you have hit it spot on. You've mentioned one technique, which is your 10 times technique, but the principle is exactly right. And it really riles me that there are people who know. We have this expression called taking the piss in the UK. Do you guys have that? They know that they are, well, you can imagine, that people know that they're taking the piss in people analytics and not doing it, and that they're playing around with toys. The other way of doing it, and I think your quantitative approach is good. I've learned over the years that the world doesn't run on quantitative so much. It runs a lot on what people care about. My friend Sid Paymer, who's now going to have to listen to this podcast, when he did his MBA, I remember he taught me something called the daughter rule. And the daughter rule is that an investor comes to you with $1 billion and says, I want to invest this in a retail outlet. What do? Do you create a department store, or do you create a shopping center with independent shops? That's an interesting question. And the traditional answer is you do a discounted cash flow, and you'd look at each model and you'd see which one gave you the highest ROI. The daughter rule says you go to the investor and you say, do you have a daughter who would like to have her own shop? If he does, then you build a shopping center with individual shops. And if he doesn't, then you build a department store. And that's how real business decisions in the world are made. Is family and those relationships, emotions, drive far more of what happens in this world, political affiliation, than a pure set of numbers. I mean, clearly, if the shopping center had an ROI gap of 40% lower than a department store, there might be some debate. But when there's not a whole lot in it. And so I would extend your approach, Cole, by doing what Oliver does so well. And that is developing a relationship with that executive and getting to know them as a human being. And then say, what would you like us to be doing in the people analytics team? Now, that doesn't require you to learn the strategy and do all the stuff that Craig said can't be done, which is like measure productivity. Then you are doing and addressing the issues that your executive thinks are important. And every month or whatever, you go back to them and say, here's how we're doing. with the list of things that you told us were important. How is that person going to fire you when there's a round of firing? I mean, that'd have to be a real psychopath. So between the two, your quant technique, my relationship emotion fueled technique, there's got to be a way to keep people analytics happy. And that executive will keep the people analytics team focused on workforce capabilities through that technique as well. They won't let you be doing stuff or won't be encouraging you to do stuff that doesn't benefit them in any way. So how's that? Executive-driven people analytics. Maybe there's the new word.
Yeah.
And,
I've actually got an article coming out that I'm writing about a CEO's guide to people analytics. So I feel like that's a good tee up there.
I like that.
But I feel like the podcast just started. We finally started having the real Directionally Correct podcast, and it's an hour and a half into the conversation.
Well, it's a Christmas special. Sorry, festive season special.
Scott, what do you have to add, man?
I have nothing. I got to bounce. Actually, I got a meeting here in a moment.
Okay.
Cool. All right. Well, enjoyed this, guys. Thanks again.
Take care, y'all. Adios.
Bye.
You eat well, you work out, but did you know 99% of Americans are still mineral deficient? That's where Concentrate's Daily Mineral Powder comes in. It's your daily foundation for better mood, natural energy, immune support, and nervous system balance. Formulated from nature and backed by science, it's a simple habit that makes a big impact. Because your body doesn't make minerals, and today's food and water don't supply enough. With Concentrates, you'll feel the difference. Go to traceminerals.com and start with minerals. Start with Concentrates.